Greetings and welcome another time to Chapters on Armstrong Television. I'm Carter Seaton, your host, and it's a delight to have you with us. And it's also a delight to have with us our guest, Corley Dennison. Corley is the author of a new book called When the Center Held True, and we're delighted to be able to talk about that today. Corley Dennison serves as the Vice Chancellor Emeritus with the West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission. He previously served as Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the Commission from 2014 to 21. From 1985 to 2014, he taught at Marshall University, where he was a faculty member, an assistant dean, dean of the W. Page Pitt School of Journalism and Mass Communications, and that was from 2004 to 2012, and then he was the Associate Provost from 2012 to 2014. So as you can see, we've got a seasoned journalist in our midst. Prior to teaching, he worked in both commercial and public broadcasting in Harrisonburg, Virginia, Maryville, Maryland, Missouri, and 3 commercial radio stations in Central Virginia. He's a graduate of James Madison University, and that was in 1976, with a mass communications degree. He earned his master's from Northwest Missouri State University and his doctorate from West Virginia University. And this is his first novel, and I hope not his last. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
It's a great feeling to have that book finally in your hands, isn't it?
It is a great feeling. It really is. And it's something I'd wanted to do for a long time, but I just didn't have the time. And
yeah.
So when I retired, that was literally the first thing I did after I retired.
Yeah. Yeah, retirement gives you the options to do a lot of things. It's good.
It does.
Yeah. Often I start our interviews with the question, what inspired you to write When the Center Held True?
I came from a family of storytellers. Of course, growing up in Appalachia, storytelling is part of the Appalachian heritage,
yeah.
and I grew up with a whole family of storytellers. My dad used to sit around the table and tell stories, and my uncles, and so I'd heard a lot of stories, about the family and about West Virginia in the mid and early 20th century. And so those stories had stayed with me for a long time. And so as things went along, I sort of developed my own story and my own narrative. And I felt like particularly the period in the late 1960s was something that might still be relevant today. So I decided to tell that story.
I would totally agree. So give us a little synopsis of the story.
Well, the story.
You don't have to give away the end, but just, the
okay.
sort of synopsis.
So the protagonist is named Clay Spurgeon. He's a young man that's born in the fictional county of Thacker, West Virginia, Thacker County, West Virginia. After a certain period of time, the family joins the great Appalachian migration northward to Ohio, with the understanding they're going to be transferred. Well, they do get transferred, and they get transferred to Virginia in 1967, and they see the end of public school segregation in Virginia. And that's, of course, is a traumatic time. There's a lot of sturm and drang and a lot of confrontation that takes place during that time, and it puts Clay in a position where he has to make some moral choices. He also happens to be the center on the high school football team, and that's where the name of the novel comes from, When the Center Held True.
I love the way you put that together. It's both the center football player and the center moral center of Clay Spurgeon. I like that. I thought that was a great title.
And it's his father that gives him his moral compass.
Right.
And so his father actually lived in a holler, and there was a black family that lived in the holler. And so his father was able to convey to him some ideas about social justice.
Mm-hmm. Is any of this based on events in your life or events in your family's life?
It is. It is a fictional account, but there are autobiographical moments in the novel, and it's true that my father had a good friend that was black when he was growing up. And according to my father, back in that day, his friend could not go to the schools, the public schools. Mm-hmm. And his mother was a school teacher, and Slim's mother is a school teacher in the book. And of course, the whole issue with public segregation and desegregation happened in Virginia at the time after we had a family transfer. The family transferred to get to Virginia, and so there are several autobiographical moments. And I also tried to keep the book on two levels, the macro level and the micro level. Tried to work into the narrative what was happening at that time on the macro level with the government and the Supreme Court, and also the micro level and how the Spurgeon family was affected by that.
Okay, so if that's somewhat based on truth, why did you choose to novelize it as opposed to making it, say, a memoir or nonfiction?
I just think because I always sort of liked the genre of historical fiction, and that gives you the ability to be in some places where maybe that didn't happen. And so while I did work in radio when I was younger, there's Clay gets a job as a stringer for UPI, and I did string for UPI, but that was much later. But I was able to pull that back into the 60s and give him the job as a stringer in high school. It was actually in college and right after I got out of college that I was a stringer for UPI. But I was able to put him in high school having that position.
All right, now, so in the 60s, where were you in your education, and did you experience this Sturm und Drang, as you considered it, as, you know, in the racial tensions?
Yes, I was in high school in the late 60s in Virginia. So I went to, at that time, of course, it was junior high. I went to junior high in Ohio, and I went to high school in Virginia. And actually, it was my sophomore year. In the book, I make it Clay's senior year, but it was my sophomore year in high school that the state was mandated to fully integrate their schools.
I see, okay. So, like most novels, there's a point in the book where, you know, things turn. There's always supposed to be a climax. Without giving that away, how did you know that fight, how did you make the decision that fight would be what would be pivotal to Clay's ending, his whatever?
Well, and I think the fight I actually came up with later. It was very late in the process when I decided to put the fight in there, and he actually physically has to have a fight, I think it just seemed an appropriate climax. And I would say that, you know, in my personal experience, I had some fist fights with people over social issues when I was in high school, but it wasn't climactic like it was in the book. So I was able, again, using the genre of historical fiction, I was able to sort of compress several events into one and then make that
one big fight.
Right, into one big fight and make that the climactic moment.
Yeah, well, you did a great job with it. I thought it was
thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, well done. Most people, there are two camps in writing: a plotter and what they call a pantser, somebody who just kind of creates characters and lets it run. Which are you?
Can I say I'm in the middle ground there?
Okay.
Well, I would say that I put this together episodically. That I would write an episode, and I would write an episode, and I would write an episode, and then I needed to go back and tie them together. And then that's what I would do.
That's an interesting way of putting it. I'd never tried that. I'm a plotter, so I outline. It's probably my many years as an English major and having to write term papers, so I'm doing that.
Well, and maybe that's my journalistic background, because you don't know the end of the story before it starts.
That's very true.
Although I think you do need to have an idea of where the story is going to end up. Otherwise, I think you can drift all over the place.
Right, I understand. So you knew what the ending was going to be. You just weren't sure, where you were going to piece all the things together. Right. Did you choose the title, or did you always think that was the title? When, sometimes when we start writing a book, we automatically have a title. Other times we don't have a clue until we get to a publisher who says, I think this is the title. Which one was it for you?
Actually, the working title of the book was Appalachian Highway.
Oh.
And referring to the migration, and then, of course, from West Virginia to Ohio, and then Virginia, which is we were still in the Blue Ridge Mountains in the book, so it sort of triangulated around the Appalachian Mountains. But then I was working with Patrick Grace, who was editing the book, and he thought that title might not reflect what was really going on in the book. And so we started kicking around titles. It was actually Patrick that came up with the title of When the Center Held True. And when he said that, I was like, that's a great title.
That's perfect, yeah. That's very good. I like that a lot. I like the references that you used to the music of the time, too, because that really puts you back there in the 60s. Did you have to research those, or did you remember them from your record collection?
I remembered them from my record collection and from my time in radio.
Yeah, oh, sure, of course, yeah.
So, if I would have to go, a lot of my Google searches were, who was on the chart at this point in time,
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure if, if Aretha Franklin was on with, Respect in June of '67, I had to make sure she was actually on the chart then. But I knew most of the music.
Yeah, that was fun. It brought back a lot of memories, although I graduated somewhat earlier than the 60s, but still, I knew all those songs. It was great to do that. I love the coach's name, Suggs.
Suggs.
He just sounds like a jerk,
It does.
Yeah. How do you choose, like Clay Spurgeon, how do you choose the names, and Slim for his father, how do you choose your names?
My master's degree is in English, and I got my master's degree at Northwest Missouri State, and I had a professor named Albertini, and he was a Willa Cather scholar, and he used to talk about Willa Cather's naming of the characters, and anyway, I remember there was a character named Ivy Peters. And Albertini used to talk about how important it was naming your characters and how that had to reflect something about the character, especially your main character. And that just sort of stuck with me. And you're right, Suggs just seemed like a good Southern jerk name.
Yeah, you did a great job. I thought, as soon as I read that, I thought, I am not going to like this man. Yeah. That's great.
So, and apologies if there's anybody named Slim, but
right.
It just seemed for that character, it just seemed to fit.
Right, it did. And Slim was the father's nickname, though,
yes,
right?
Slim was he was actually Clay Spurgeon Sr.
Oh yes. Okay.
So, but Slim was his nickname. Everybody knew him as Slim.
Yeah, not because he was heavy, but just because it was his nickname.
Right, and to tell you the truth, I picked Clay and Slim because those sounded like Appalachian names.
Yeah.
Clay, sort of, salt of the earth type name, and Slim, and there's, of course, there was Slim Pickens and a couple country artists named Slim. And
right. Did you have a good time writing this book?
I did.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's great. So you spent much of your early career in journalism, mostly broadcast or written journalism as well?
Broadcasting, mostly radio.
Yeah. But still, you have to write the story before you can broadcast it, right?
Right.
Do you think that helped you with writing a novel, or did the novel form challenge you, since you're used to short stuff?
Right. The novel form challenged me. I would say that I'm a better storyteller than I am a writer.
I don't know. You did a pretty good job. You held my attention.
Oh, well, thank you. But so that's where Patrick Grace came in, and he used to get on me about commas and of course, the thing of it is in broadcasting, if there's a comma, that's a hard stop.
Yes.
And usually then if you were looking at copy that you were going to read where there was a comma, you would draw a line.
So you took a breath.
So you took a breath.
Yeah.
Right. Comma is take a breath. And so, but that doesn't always apply in the novel form.
Yeah.
And so there were some things I had to get used to, and I'm still getting used to.
Yeah. When my husband is bad to do that too. He will put a comma because I tend to write some long sentences, and he'll think that I need to take a breath. And I'll say, Richard, I'm sorry, but a comma does not belong before the word because, it's just not necessary. So, yeah, it's very different, I'm sure, because of the broadcast journalism requirements to make sure people don't just run on and run on.
Short sentences.
Right, exactly.
Short.
Yeah. Have you ever taken writing classes or workshops?
Not in the novel style. When I was in my master's program, I took a magazine writing class, but I've never done like an author's workshop or anything like that.
Well, so you wrote it and then asked Patrick Grace to edit it?
Yes.
You weren't in his life writing class or any of that? That's good. Good for you. How long did it take you to write the book?
I think it was 8 months.
Oh, wow. That's pretty short.
So I think it was 8 months. And so what I set up, I tried to do 1,000 words a day. That was my goal. Quite often I didn't hit 1,000 words a day, but I always tried to take some time and sit down and write, and my goal was 1,000 words a day.
You really were determined, weren't you?
I was.
That's great. So do you have a specific routine? Is it get up, drink a cup of coffee, and then start writing?
Not quite, but yes.
Yeah.
Fairly close to that. Usually, I don't really start writing at 6 or 7 o'clock, but usually by 9 o'clock I'm writing, and then by 11 o'clock or 11:30 I've about had it, and I have to go work in the yard or take a walk or do something. Occasionally I'll come back and work in the afternoon, but I mean I even knew that during my work day. My hours are like 9 to 12. Those are really productive.
That's your productive time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you the kind of writer who gets down a rough draft? You know, Anne Lamott's got this phrase for a crappy first draft, and then you go back and you edit, or are you the kind who wants to make sure that your chapters work before you move on to the next one?
I want to get it all out first, and then I'll go back and fix it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I read one place, you know, Hemingway would get up and read everything he had written before he started writing. And I don't see how you do that. I mean, I understand you've got to back up and you know, you've got to back up and sort of pick up where you left off and make sure it all flows. But I don't see how you read everything you've written before you start writing again.
No, I don't either. And I couldn't. I might go back and read the chapter before.
Right.
But not the entire manuscript.
Right.
Yeah. I would never get to the writing part. Right. They say that good writers must also be, first, good readers. Are you an avid reader?
I am.
You know, what do you prefer reading?
Well, of course, for pleasure, I like to read historical fiction. I like to read a lot of biographies and a lot of historical accounts. You know, I'll read people like John Meacham, for example. I read a lot of things about the Civil War, that type of thing. Like I say, good historical fiction, though, is when I really want to escape, or spy novels. And you know, I thought about, and I have created Clay Spurgeon. I kind of thought about a spy series, but I decided, you know, there's a lot of those out there, and that perhaps an Appalachian story might be more unique than a spy series.
Do you have favorite authors?
I like John Grisham, and the fact that John Grisham can bring a courtroom to life.
Yeah.
And I like Nelson DeMille, and of course John Meacham. I think I've read a number of John Meacham's biographies, and he has a new Lincoln biography out that I'm looking forward to. So,
have you read Doris Kearns Goodwin's biographies?
I have.
Yeah.
Yes, she's very good as well. As a matter of fact, I thought her Rivals book was maybe one of the best Lincoln books out there.
Right, yeah, she's terrific. Are you working on anything now?
I am.
Oh, good. A sequel, maybe?
Well, it is a sequel, and you know, some people say, well, you know, sequels are never as good, but this is really a continuation of the story, and it is going to be set in West Virginia as well.
So you'll take him through into adulthood?
We'll take him into adulthood. He's going to have graduated from college, and we'll take him into adulthood, and he's going to come back to West Virginia.
That's great. Talk a little bit about your cover. It's really pretty.
You know, the cover, and again, I have to give Patrick Grace credit on that. You know, we both agreed we really needed a good cover, and so he brought a Huntington artist in named Debbie Richardson, and we talked about the town. And, you know, we really needed the town to come to life, and it needed to be a Blue Ridge, you know, town in Virginia. Well, she found some postcards, and she found a postcard of Winchester, Virginia in the 1970s. And she had done a painting of Barbersville, I think in the 1980s. So we took the painting from Barbersville and we took the picture from Winchester, and she put the cover together and really brought the town of Jeffrey Courthouse to life. And Jeffrey Courthouse is something that's kind of unique to Virginia. They oftentimes call their county seat Courthouse. So, you know, Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse, and that's the name of the town. It's not like he surrendered at the courthouse in Appomattox. Right. And so she put Jeffrey, but anyway, we have the Redskins, which is the name of the high school football team, on on the car. And I did by the way, the Redskins were purposeful too, because it's a little bit of an out of favor name right now. So I thought, you know, particularly given the situation, that might be a good name for the team.
Yeah. What was the most exciting thing to you about writing this story?
I think when you finally finished it and go back and read it, and it's something that you've had in your mind for a long time, and you're able to bring it to life and put it together, and you see it and you read it, and you read through it, you know, and you say, well, you know, that's not bad, you know, I'm okay with this, and then, you know, you're interested to see how other people respond to it.
How long is it? Just barely coming out, right?
Yes.
But you have had some people comment on it and,
Yes.
and give reviews and so forth.
Yes.
Have you felt like you know, it did what you wanted it to do in terms of?
Yes. I told my wife, Betty, that, you know, in the end, I would hope people would just say, you know, that was a good story. That's really what I wanted. And if I've accomplished that, the sales are nice, and I hope that happens, but in the end, I hope people think it's a good story. That's what's important.
But I also think that because of the underlying moral story here, it's important that they look at it from the macro as well.
Yes.
Not just this one individual boy's story of fighting the moral battle,
Right.
but the whole issue of race relations, because it hasn't gone away.
Because it hasn't gone away. That's right. I mean, if you look at, if you go back to the issues they're facing in the novel, like I say, they resonate today. There's a school board meeting, and school boards have become the focus of controversy. You have race relations, and we're still dealing with that issue. The election of 1968 is in there, and
Yes.
actually that was a very pivotal election in American history, and so, you know, there's a lot of issues that are still very relevant.
And I'm sure you remember that election too.
I do.
Yeah, watching it on television and all that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What was the hardest thing about writing the novel?
I think the hardest thing is sometimes you have stories in your mind that you've carried around for a long time, and when you begin to put it on paper in words and you're typing along and you're like, this is just taking forever. And then you wonder, are you dragging the story down in the mud? And then there were a couple of stories that I actually ended up taking out
Oh.
because they just didn't seem to quite fit, or they seemed to maybe they were a little harder to tell than I thought they were. And perhaps that's my inability to tell the story, but I thought, you know, it's not really fitting in this format. That probably works better in an oral format than it did in a written format. So I think that was the hardest thing.
Incidents between characters that had already been created, and you decided cut that whole incident out.
Cut that whole incident out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Aside from the protagonist, do you have a favorite character?
I think Leroy Berry is a complex character, and Leroy Berry is he's the star football player on the team. He happens to be black, and he's only one of 2 black students in the school, and I think he's an interesting character. And there are a lot of things that are unsaid about Leroy, but that's because Clay didn't know them, right? And so. But you know, there's his involvement in some of the demonstrations. There's, you know, some things that go on in the background that make, I think, Leroy Berry a complex character.
Could you use him in another book?
I could.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that, but I could.
Yeah. Well, he sounds like somebody that you could develop into a broader story. Yeah.
And the other thing was, as I was working on Coach Suggs, who's a bigot and alcoholic, I had to not make him cartoonish. You had to keep him as a realistic character.
Yeah, and I think you did a good job with that.
Oh, thank you.
You know, I mean, we've all seen people that have one or the other of those problems, but I think you managed to make a balance out of him. He's still a family man, and still has his own demons to battle.
That's right. Well, and that was something else that people are complex. So one of the neighbors, when the Spurgeon family moves into Virginia, one of the neighbors makes a really racist comment to them. Yet later on, she comes back and helps the family out when Slim has a car wreck, and so people are complex. You know, at some point they can they can have prejudices or faults, and then they can turn around and be very, very giving.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of the car wreck, that's another thing. We talked about the peak in the middle, but you've also got kind of rising action, and then things calm down a little bit, and then you go back up. If you had the incident of the car wreck, did you know exactly where you were going to put that in the book?
I didn't. When I was first started writing, I didn't know where I was going to put it. But then, and my father actually did have a very bad car accident in 1969. So that part is autobiographical. Yeah. And at that point, then Clay loses some of his moral center at that point. He kind of relied on his father to be his moral compass, and then all of a sudden his father's laid up in the hospital.
Right.
And some of that is autobiographical. And so it just seemed like the wreck did happen in 1969, and so given the fact that was the year that the schools were integrated, and it seemed like that worked to keep that right there in that time frame.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Yeah, you did a great job. Is there anything else about the story that you think you need to tell us, or can you give us any hints about the next book?
The next book, I'm actually going to use the Braxton County Monster.
Oh,
If you're familiar with that story, the UFO incident in Flatwoods back in the 1950s that generated national news. But I'm going to move that up to the 70s so that Clay can be there and can experience that. And we'll get into a little bit of Appalachian stereotyping with that. There's other things that are going on, but that's going to set off a series of events.
Oh, that's fantastic. I like the idea. Yeah, that'll be fun. Well, I look forward to it. I think it'll be a great story, and you've done a super job telling this one. I hope you got lots of sales, lots of praise. It's a great book. Thank you so much. I think we're about out of time. Thank you so much for joining us here on Chapters, and thank you, Corley, for being with us. It's been wonderful. When the Center Held True. It's a book you all ought to read. That's it today for everything, and keep safe, stay well, have a good day. Bye.
Connect with Chapters through email. Write to lp4@zoominternet.net. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. All Chapters episodes are available on YouTube. Visit the Armstrong Neighborhood channel on YouTube and look for a playlist of all the Chapters programs.